All right, we'll reconvene the meeting at 11:36 p.m. Just for the record, we are going directly to, we're bringing item 5 in at the end of the meeting in the interests of trying to stay as close as we can to the time. So the first person who's presenting is Tony McLaughlin for Chedworth Properties. So Tony, if you could come up to the table here.
Richard. I've verbally told the ones who are out here and getting stuff out to them. So Tony's
Right. So Tony, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
The clock is on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and
which I can't see. Okay, that's on. No problem.
and there will be no questions. So
okay,
thank you.
That's fine. Okay, Your Worship, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name's Tony McLaughlin. I'm the Development Manager for Chedworth Properties. Just been informed by Richard in the hallway there that council was looking to make a resolution to remove the additional assets from the schedule and not update the schedule of charges, which Chedworth Properties supports. A lot of my submission, well, verbal submission, was focused around that, and I've handed out some attachments which show the sort of increases that we've had over the last 5 years, and also look at the forecast of where building consents are going, the second one, in the next 5 years. So there's some real pressures on growth there, and there's Infometrics are forecasting a big decline in building consent. So we don't know whether these DCs will ever be collected, and we're certainly seeing it on the ground in the market at the moment in terms of the demand for both residential and commercial industrial product. It's very hard to make the numbers work. So given those changes, I'd sort of like to focus my submission today on the cap charges at Rotorcarry. So in principle, Chedworth Properties conditionally support those, but we really don't believe that's the best solution. The best solution, we believe, is to get those charges right in the first instance. So what is happening out there is that those charges are being based on industrial manufacturing facilities which have much higher demand on infrastructure than what is predominantly being built out there, which is industrial warehousing. So that's creating a situation where, from the beginning, users are significantly overcharged, and then to compound that, businesses cannot recover that money under the remissions policy. So that's a significant deterrent to businesses opening up in Hamilton. And it obviously creates a lot of angst and distrust from developers and businesses with regards to council and the way the policy is structured. So we believe that urgently needs to be addressed. In addition to that, the proposed changes to the gross floor area definition, they're only going to compound that problem. Because already we have an overcharge situation predominantly, and these changes to the definition are only going to increase that overcharge. So again, we strongly oppose the changes to the proposed gross floor area definition. If you've had the chance to read Chedworth's submissions, you'll note that we've identified a number of issues in addition to the 6 key points that we'd like council to consider as part of a more comprehensive review of the DC policy. I mean, we believe these are critical to, again, allow us and other businesses to make informed investment decisions on long-term projects. So, in summary, we would believe that all of the changes as proposed should be declined, and that council should engage with the industry and look to conduct a more thorough review of the DC policy so we can come up with something that is attractive to businesses and residents of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Mark Neal. No, there are no. I'm not taking questions on these items. No.
Thank you, everyone. Mike Neal. I'm here on behalf of the Hamilton Central Business Association and Vanessa Williams. We're here about the removal of the Central City remission on DCs. And the CBD remission was put in place originally to encourage development to assist with the revitalisation of the Hamilton City Centre, and that has certainly had a great impact. And I think part of it is we need to be aware of what is happening out there at the moment. The market is softening, especially for development properties and sites. There is tighter bank lending, both commercially and again for development properties. Even the scrapping of the capital gains tax and allowing of the OCR yesterday, we're unsure as to how much impact that will actually have. But it's not just about the DCs. Mayor King has mentioned previously, construction costs, compliance costs, consulting, council fees have all had an impact, along with the higher land prices. We've also benefited from the economic cycle that we've been in, and we may not be in that same cycle right now. This does certainly in the central city relate significantly more to intensive residential and apartment development, but it does also have an impact on commercial as well, especially with new builds. DCs are really the main lever that council has to assist with development, and let's remember, council are not the one taking the risk. It also allows developers to make their end product a bit better than it might have been, other than focusing on where can we cut corners, and that is what developers will do to make deals stack up with the increasing costs that they're facing. I think Hamilton needs to take a longer term view of development, especially under the capital value rating system. The rates pie does increase through intensive development. We had a bit of a look at a property on Anglesey Street yesterday that had a rates take. It had a car yard removed. It's now got apartments on there, and the rates take has increased by over 25% from that development. So it's not just about DCs. You are growing the pie. There are a couple of developments in the CBD that are for proposed apartments. One is in Clarence Street. Talking to the developer, that is very much a fallback position because he knows if he redevelops the existing building for commercial, the DCs will be less, and that may be an easier option for him. The IRD building, which you've probably seen some media on, they do have some cost challenges, and depending how the DCs look on that again will also have an impact on what might be the end outcome. We're certainly not saying that it should never be DCs in the CBD, but it's certainly too early, and we need significantly more continued development and investment in the city centre in a view of the softening market which we appear to be facing. Let's review, our view has always been, let's review the remission on CBD development contributions in 2021 and whether at that time we reinstate or phase them back in. We would suggest that what we'll see in building consents over the next 6 to 12 months may then allow you to make a better and more informed decision on the remission on CBD development contributions.
Okay,
thank you.
Mike, did that include your Harcourt's presentation?
Yep, that was we combined them.
Well done, thank you.
We thought we'd save you a bit of time.
It took some pressure off me too.
Yeah.
Because technically we can't have people doing
no, that's fine.
Back-to-backs. Okay. So, okay, thank you. So Holdsworth Holdings, is there someone here to present? Sorry?
It's council.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Just get you to start by introducing yourselves as well, please.
Morning all, my name's Nick Shafarik. I represent Honsel Holdings. We are primarily based out in Rotokauri with residential development land to the north and west of Wintec. Our submission is regarding the proposed increase in DCs for Rotokauri, which is, I've got a paper there in front of you by the way, which has principally been revised upwards from 69,000 to 77,000 based on a revision of the hue uptake down. So, Mr Mayor, we were here last year presenting on the same thing with the hues, and we were hoping during the year that we would convince council that the hue uptake in Rotokauri would go a lot quicker than what they were proposing previously. I think we've actually done that with most of the councillors, but for some reason we seem to have hues decreasing in terms of uptake. And the upshot is that the DCs that were already very high have now gone up considerably more again. We know from the developments that are out there at the moment, well, we believe from the developments out there at the moment, it's quite easy to identify at least 1,800 hues over the next 10 years before the swale's even constructed, and they're capable of being built, and a lot of them are underway at the moment. That would completely contradict the revision that's being done that's in front of council right now. So we are seeking a revision of the hue uptake as part of the setting of the DCs for Rotokauri. We haven't included Charles Mars SHA. It doesn't affect the stormwater component, so it doesn't dramatically change overall DCs for us, but clearly there's a lot of evidence of the build that's looking to go out there with the Tainui, Everton stuff, our build. I think it's relatively well evidenced in terms of what we've presented to council over the last 12 months. That's about all I've got.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Perry Group. I'll just get you to start by introducing yourself and your position.
Yep, sure. My name's Paul Radich. I'm the development planner for Perry Group. I'm here to speak on behalf of them to our submission. So thanks for the opportunity. I just want to quickly run through some key submission points. You'll be aware of Perry's and their background through their commercial investment arm and the Brian Perry Charitable Trust. So just in terms of our submission points, growth pays for growth. We acknowledge that growth in Hamilton is ongoing and the need to accommodate this, but we have some reservations about that blanket principle. We think it fails or risks a failure to appreciate the nuanced relationship between regulated developer and the end user. We support retaining the CBD remission. Perry's is situated in the CBD, so we're there every day, and we believe a strong CBD is crucial for the health of the city. And so support retaining this and would seek the intentions for the next review period. Replacing estimated costs with actuals, Perry's would like some more confidence in the accuracy of costs and recommended that these would be tested. Visibility of how these are built up and verified would provide the market and ratepayers with increased confidence. Like many cities in New Zealand, Hamilton is experiencing high growth. Like many cities, this growth is not being fully met. We believe there is a shortfall today of around 2,300 homes. And Perry suggests that HCC turn its mind to how DCs could positively affect affordability in the city, such as requesting them at a later time to help de-risk developments and just help with the cash flow. Perry's have identified an opportunity in Te Rapa North to respond to these needs, and DCs will play a part in the funding and planning of this infrastructure, which as that node develops into a mixed-use node, DCs reflect, Perry's hope that DCs will reflect those developers who have put in their infrastructure, as Perry's has for Te Awa Lakes, and reflects that capital expenditure. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. We believe that the policy is a step in the right place. It shows previous consultations have been considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Adair.
I'm a lawyer representing the Adair Company Limited regarding its submission. I'm assisted by Mr Mitchell Moore, who's been assisting a number of developers and business interests in Hamilton regarding the DC policy. While Adair and the Peacock family won't need an introduction to councillors, I just want to set the context very briefly for the remainder of what I have to say today by noting that the Peacock family have owned land within what is now known as the Peacock Structure Plan area since the 1880s. In this respect, I say that Adair and Westernlea are not typical landowner companies. The family are in this for the long term. Not only that, the family want what's best for Hamilton. The councillors will be aware that Adair, through Westernlea Limited, is currently seeking resource consent for a residential subdivision comprising approximately 830 lots within the PSPA. This development comprises 105 hectares of the 192 hectares of land owned by Adair in the structure plan area. The development of Adair's other land holdings in the PSPA are expected to yield a further 900 lots. While Adair might be soon in a position to progress this development, it won't do so if it doesn't make commercial sense to do so. I'm not trying to be provocative in what I'm here to say today, but what I'm trying to say is, given the current uncertainties and concerns regarding the council's approach to development contributions, that this is a possibility. Perhaps unlike other developers who have acquired land specifically to develop and usually have commercial drivers requiring them to get on with their development, in Adair's case, delayed development is a real prospect that shouldn't be dismissed. Should Adair or Westernlea delay bringing forward its development aspirations, this will have significant implications for the council, including in terms of its population projections for the PSPA, the associated levying of DCs, and indeed the council's future projected rating base. I know we've been asked only to comment on the key amendments today, and obviously the council's just made a decision to remove one of those, which I was going to comment on. I am just going to talk very briefly about the concerns regarding the model as a whole and what Adair is asking the council to do, being go back to square one and reassess the DC model. Obviously, the council's decision to remove the additional assets is supported by Adair, but as I say, there are wider concerns about the modelling being undertaken that supports the DC policy. As I said, Adair's position is that the council does need to go back to the drawing board on the DC policy. Both the DC model and also interactions with council staff have left Adair with a prevailing sense that the council sees developers and its DC policy as a money-making mechanism rather than a mechanism for recovering the true and fair costs of growth. As a principle, of course, Adair does not take issue with the growth pays for growth principle that's been adopted by the council. But those developers who are looking to invest in Hamilton should not be being used by the council to fund anything more than a fair, equitable and proportionate portion of the total cost of capital expenditure necessary to service growth over the long term. Of course, there are legal reasons for this, and clearly the LGA sets a statutory framework for DCs with limits and legal parameters in terms of what the council can recover via DCs. But there are also economic reasons for this, and these are more interesting when it comes to thinking about what the outcome of the council's approach to DCs might be. There is already anecdotal evidence of the residential market softening in Auckland, with an expectation that this will ripple down to Hamilton. Given the wider economic context, in light of the unfair burden I say has been placed on the developer community, the council seriously risks incentivising developers like Adair to simply wait before proceeding with development plans. What are the concerns with the modelling and the DC policy? These are addressed in the written submission, and I'm only going to very briefly address them. The first is that the broader benefits of growth to the community is not provided for in the cost allocation methodology. Adair submitted on this last year, and it still has not been addressed by the council. The cost allocations do not always appear to reflect population growth. There's an example in the submission in relation to sports parks. For instance, in Peacock 1, a developer pays $545 per unit for sports parks. Within Peacock 2, the charge is $2,678. In both instances, you've got one unit of demand being created by residents in essentially geographic locations that would both use that sports park. There are unfunded capital expenditure projects included, and historic interest rates applied in the model are higher than the average cost of debt. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to continue.
Just wrap it up there. Go to your conclusions if you like, or I'm not sure how far off you are from finishing. But
I'll just, one final issue that I wanted to very briefly address is the triggers. This is something, again, that's not changing in the DC policy but was submitted on last year. The fact that the council can effectively elect which trigger it will require DCs Act creates considerable uncertainty for developers like Adair. This creates risks, and this uncertainty and associated risk again means there's a greater probability of development in Hamilton being delayed or stalled. I implore you to listen to what the development community is saying about the DC policy and the model as a whole, which I say needs to be reconsidered by the council to ensure that developers such as Adair do not face bearing a disproportionate burden of the capital expenses of the city, or worse, decide not to proceed with development at all. Thank you.
thank you, Lucy. Porter Group. So, John, you're presenting for both Porter Group and so are you keeping those separate presentations, or are you wrapping up as one?
It's combined together.
It's combined, okay.
Thank you. Sorry?
Porter Group and who else?
AgPack Industries.
So just start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Your Worship and the Mayor, and councillors. My name's John DeLuca. I'm the property manager for Porter Group. You'll be well aware that we're quite a large development group that provides part of the chain of events to create industrial land ready for developers to come along and develop their sites, their buildings. Unfortunately, what happens at the present time is that we sell sections, and part of that process is a due diligence by the developer, and part of their due diligence is that they assess their DCs, and when they look at their DCs, the whole deal falls through. That's becoming a reality, which is starting to kick home by the fact that we have not done a subdivision of a piece of land, a new subdivision related to the new policy from last year. We have not done one in the last 10 months. I just want to really go through what the effect of the remission policy, etc., is related to the AgPack deal. But before I do that, I want to remind council and councillors of the legal opinion that we circulated, that we received in relation to the remissions. And there's a couple of main items in there that I'd like to quote from that opinion, is that the remissions policy must give effect to a fair and equitable avoiding over-recovery of DCs. In the AgPack case, it is abundantly clear the actual units of demand, whether based on Porter's AgPack figures or the consultants' figures that were provided to council by council's consultants, are far less than the figures council has used in making the remission decision. And it is believed that the overcharging is neither fair or equitable. Council's decision clearly fails to meet the requirements of the Local Government Act, and also in the opinion of the view is that council's remission decision is legally wrong, and that clause 17.12b of the DC's policy is unlawful. On looking at the facts of the AgPack development, AgPack is on a 10,200 square metre section with a 4,200 square metre building, including canopy. The council's demand calculation for DCs based on the policy is $940,000. Porters, in conjunction with AgPack, because of the size of that, we undertook a reassessment of the demand based on actual rates of demand for transport, water and wastewater. The resulting development contribution calculation based on actual demand was 145,000. That's a difference of 795,000. It's significant. And AgPac have said to me if they had known what the implications of this were prior to undertaking their development, they wouldn't have proceeded. Unfortunately, their consultants were remiss in not actually consulting with them on the size of the DCs. The reports from the that have been undertaken by reputable contractors or consultants, and we believe that the figures that were presented to council are correct and need to be taken heed of in creating the remission calculation. If we go to the specifics of the AgPac example, the total demand of the policy based on the policy of Hamilton City Council was 49.82 units of demand. In this case, I'm just talking about specifically transport as an example. So there's 49.82 units of demand for transport, which equated to approximately $770,000. The independent actual demand undertaken for transport was 8.9 units of demand, which equated to 138,000. Council's own consultants in assessing the remissions application came back to council saying that the units of demand was 15.4, which is $230,000. So even council's own consultants were significantly different from the what was in the original policy outcome. And then the remission outcome that that Porters received and AgPac received didn't specify the units of demand, but for transport allocated 677,000. So we have 4 totally different interpretations of demand, with the 3 Hamilton City Council interpretations far in excess of the actual demand. The end result was that the policy is creating large demand credits that can't be utilised or refunded, money for nothing. Huge discrepancy in demand calculation. There's no basis for council to increase the demand, the remission adjustment factor, when its own consultants are saying there's at a certain level. If you extrapolate the transport remission figure of 677,000 related to the actual demand, the cost per unit of demand increases from 15,423, which is what's in the policy, to 76,000, an increase of 393%. Why should one business pay 76,000 per unit of demand for transport when a neighbouring property may pay, as per the policy, at 15,000? Totally unrealistic. Which brings me quickly to my second example. And I need to keep the name of this company confidential for various reasons at this stage, but our preliminary calculations for this second site based on Hamilton City Council's policy is 1.2 million. Based on actual demand, our preliminary assessments of actual demand, the DCs should be 360,000. That's a difference of about 840,000. Based on council's previous remissions outcomes, so we've interpreted how council's worked through its remissions if an application is received, we believe it'll be in the vicinity of just over 1 million. So the actual demand remission is somewhere in the vicinity of 800,000 out when compared to the actual demand. The developer and group of investors of this proposal, which is just over a hectare of land, have confirmed in writing to Porters that the project becomes uneconomic for the occupier of at the levels of DCs that Council is proposing, unless remissions are realistic and provided for. So they will not bring their business to Hamilton. They will not proceed with the purchase of approximately a hectare of land from Porter Properties. And the investors do, however, appreciate DCs need to be paid, but are looking for something that reflects the actual demand. The two examples bring to the fore the failings of the DC policy when dealing with large warehouse complexes. Our large warehouse complexes have a relative low level of demand on the Council's infrastructure. In these situations, the current policy, based on actual demand, based on their current policy, the DCs, where the DCs of the actual demand are a lot less than the DCs paid at the time of, the DCs are paid based on the policy. So there's a certain discrepancy there that needs to be addressed in the policy relating to large, complex developments. And if I may just finish to say that Porter Properties are endeavouring to facilitate growth and development in Hamilton by creating the land for use by businesses. It is getting increasingly harder to get the purchase of the land across the line once businesses undertake their due diligence related to DCs. And I reiterate, we have not done a subdivision in the Porter Farm area for an individual section for the last 10 months, up till the 1st of May. Now that certainly, that certainly will impact on Council's finances. Thank you.
Okay, welcome Peter. You have 5 minutes. The clock's on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and I will be stopping you once we get to the 5 minutes.
Sorry, what was the reference to the screen?
On the bottom right-hand corner of the screen.
Sure, okay.
There's a time clock. The bell will ring at 5 minutes, and I do need you to stop then. Thank you.
Okay.
The clock won't start till you're ready. Relax.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Yep, I'm good to go. Are we on? Yep.
You just need to talk.
Okay. I'm just going to talk to my submission, my oral submission today, along with a diagram that or an aerial shot that I've got. And I have Richard kindly let me know of a resolution passed this morning, and I'm not going to comment on anything where there's general agreement. So normally I would support mechanisms designed to or intended to foster economic growth, and in this case Council's proposals, which include extending the current CBD remission policy and capping non-residential development contribution charges in Rotokauri. However, my issue is with the development contribution proposals that relate to distinct economic and competitive advantages conferred on the CBD in Rotokauri compared to development contributions that apply for similar forms of development in other areas. 3, my wife and I own residential intensification zone land in close proximity to the CBD, and specifically at Gwyn Street, together with an adjoining site in Victoria Street, as shown now. So I've shown those in the diagram, just where the red dot is. It shows the Whittiora Bridge there, and really what I'm intending to highlight is you can be on one side of the road and have a very attractive development contribution policy that applies, and be on the other side and it doesn't. So carrying on with 4, of specific concern is the housing typologies that are able to be developed in the CBD. They're same or similar to those able to be developed in the adjacent residential intensification zone, however distinct and identifiable economic and commercial advantages are conferred if development occurs within the CBD compared to other areas, including those that are adjacent to or in close proximity to the CBD. In my view, the current development contribution policy does not represent a level playing field for the same forms of development in Hamilton City. Whilst I understand some of that history that's led to this policy, it's important not to perpetuate inequities that arise through continuation of such policies. My view is whilst retention of growth-orientated policy has merit, it should be more evenly and fairly applied or withdrawn. My submission is irrespective of whether the current remission policy is extended or retained. The area to which the remission policy applies should be extended to include residential intensification zone land adjacent to the Waikato River and between Anzac Parade and the Fairfield Bridge as a minimum, or extended citywide. Further to the above, I note the regularity at which development contributions are reset. Application of the producer price index to these charges would provide greater certainty of future changes in the level of development contributions and simplify the process for all concerned. Notwithstanding the above, given the substantial changes to the development contributions arising from last year's review, along with the changing economic environment, I suggest that development contributions be frozen for the next 12 months, potentially 2 years, up until the next LTP. That's all from me.
Thank you, Peter.
I'm early.
No, we're not taking questions. Waikato Chamber of Commerce, Chris. Thank you, Chris. You have 5 minutes. Clock's on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Start when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Worship, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to present our report. I won't go into specifics, as you can read what we've already presented. However, our view as the Chamber of Commerce and Industry is a longitudinal one. For your information, we've been around since 1906. A little bit of background history for you. We were created by the Mayor of Hamilton in 1906. A man called James Bond. And what we have been doing since 1906 has been working with the council. We've been a little bit remiss in the past number of years where we haven't worked closely with you. We're here today working with our colleagues in the property industry to start working with you about these sort of decisions making. Regarding the way that this process has gone, we believe that's been a complete failure to have a consultation of 12 working days compared to what should best practice be, which is normally about 20 working days. So we think that as governors, how do we work with industry on that? The other failure that happens in these conversations is the lack of understanding of how the costs are passed on to business and industry. And let's put this into perspective. So the Hamilton economy comes in as a $8 to $9 billion economy. Now, GDP growth is about 3.4%, which is absolutely stunning. But the reality is our productivity growth is minus 0.2. We're going backwards with regards to what we're producing. So those are stats on your own website. With regards to going back at minus 0.2%. New Zealand is actually going ahead at 0.2%, so we're going backwards. That's a true cost, a true opportunity cost, which we would like to work with you to better understand so that we can make better decision making around where development contributions actually are a cost to our economy. Hence why when the property community says to you that we are here to actually push why development contributions should be taken seriously as to how it affects our economy, we are totally supportive of them, because what they do, ergo what you do, is that you pass the cost on to business, and that true cost is that lack of productivity. So how do we do better? That's where we're looking from a remit from yourselves to work a lot more closely with us as a Chamber of Commerce and industry so we can do better for those that are in employment and those that are in the workforce. That's who we are really here for. So thank you for that aspect. Jason, my colleague, would you like to add anything to that? I'm fine. No. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Chris. On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, now call Gallagher Group. Thank you. Don't I know you from somewhere, Jason?
He's never been in this room.
Thank you, John Gallagher. Just make yourself comfortable. You have 5 minutes once you start speaking.
All right, thank you, Your Worship, Andrew, and councillors. It's an opportunity to just express some of the things, as I sent you all an email, which I trust you all read well. I made sure it was only one page, so it's easy readable, because I know a bit about council's multiple pages points. And just really covering some of the things that I've covered off in there. And I guess one was a timing thing, and Chris mentioned that. That was not helpful because yours had school holidays at that particular time. And I guess the next one was to do with growth, pays for growth. My view, these sort of levies should be equitable across the city, not favouring one or the other, because you give like the central city one, who's paying for that? Am I actually contributing that as well as a ratepayer in my fees? So I guess fair and equitable, I mean they should be same right across the city for the different land. The Gallagher business, I mentioned there, and probably some of you may not realise what size we are, and so something at the end I'd like to invite you to visit with us at some time and just see what we're doing. We're plans to grow, double our size in the next 5 years. Now that means a lot more factories, a lot more work. We're already building a warehouse in the United Kingdom. We've got them in Canada, US, Australia, Africa, and a few other interesting places around the world. So we're growing, and most of our manufacturing is done in New Zealand. We've worked very hard to try and maintain that in New Zealand, because I've been around, well, the Gallagher family's been around the Waikato for more than 150 years. And in the city, probably we're in something like about 100 odd years. So I have an attachment to being here and assisting the city. But what we're finding, particularly with the last round of DC increases, it really is becoming unequitable to actually try and build more buildings. Even though we have the land, to put more buildings there to cover the staff, because growing a double size, that's going to mean probably not double the staff, but double the size. So even that, as I say, the last round of DCs really have us looking seriously at, do we bother developing any further here? And one instance I did there, we were looking just to extend a couple of bays on one of our factories. And the council wants us to spend $65,000 on some sort of performance report for fire. We have actually had 2 or 3 fires in our place, all very well contained, because we make darn sure that we are covering ourselves. Because at one stage, in 1974, I think it was, we actually lost our one little manufacturing unit. But right through the wall of that particular part of the factory, there was huge vats of oil and stuff like that. The fire never got into them, because part of our management of the fire. So when you start getting those sort of costs later on for different things, it makes you think we ain't going to do it anymore. And so so basically that extension's been canned, and we're just thinking how we deal with it. We have had other councils where we've got 2 other factories within New Zealand, and looking at those, do we locate them here or do we not? Answer's no. It's about 200 workers involved. So not at this stage, no relocation here because we can't afford the cost of it. And one of the ones we also, just on the ownership of some of the property, is actually owned by a charitable trust or foundation. All the net profit goes back into the community. So there's a huge amount goes back into the community from us for that purpose. And we've set that out years and years ago to actually be able to do that, to support the community. So, where are we? Now, yes, just building we just completed earlier this year, we paid over $600,000 for the stormwater and the stormwater stuff. Council paid nothing towards it. In fact, all the stormwater in our area down there, we have paid for. And you still want to clip us for development levies of stormwater. My understanding, there should be a stormwater plan for that region. Where is it, Council? What have you ever done that? So we know what we're doing. And I guess some of the nitpicking we see, and I mentioned a couple of them there, and a couple of others just come to my attention on a residential site. Oops, we're there. On a residential site, I've got to have a neighbour. Oh, I shouldn't have said I because it is me. I've got to have a neighbour sign a 30-page plan that he understands and knows about when he is only on one boundary. Think about some of those sort of things. We have another one issue just starting, and I think you people will be in the frame shortly on that one.
So just come to your conclusions and...
Yes. No. So really I'd invite any councillors and senior staff to visit with us and perhaps help us through some of the things. And if we can work together, we'd love to do that.
Thank you, John. Foster's.
Good to go?
Yes, just introduce yourself.
I will do,
ready.
yeah.
Clock won't start till you're ready.
Got it.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
So afternoon, everybody. My name is Rhys Harvey. I'm the Development Director at Foster's Group. So I'm going to talk to our submission today. I'm going to talk to key amendments 1, 2, 3 and 5. I will talk to 2 as it's in what I've written up to talk to, but I'll try and put some context into that being taken out. So, by way of introduction, firstly, our submission reflects the views of Foster Group as a property developer and as a provider of construction and property maintenance services. And secondly, and pretty importantly to us, our contribution to achieving sustainable growth within the Hamilton community. We'd like to be clear that we recognise the cost of growth and infrastructure required, and that the development business community is one of the beneficiaries of that growth. And therefore, we 100% support some reasonable cost. The point we'd like to make clear, though, is what's difficult to support is the magnitude and uncertainty of the costs that are coming through. We're seeing the policy, which is proving complex, provides cost uncertainty, and is generally seems to be spooking the investment community, as other people have spoken to today. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my closing. So as far as our submission on points 1 to 5, we really looked at this with the, I guess, terms of reference around will DC costs encourage or will it potentially discourage growth within our community and provide jobs. So those were our terms of reference, and don't forget I'm talking to Foster's Group. Our submission was based on outcomes rather than operational matters in relation to the fairness of the DC model itself. So for amendments 1 and 2, recognising the changes in 2, replacing the estimate costs with actual costs where possible, and the inclusion of additional assets. We've grouped those together as we believe that the outcome of those are the same. And I'd like to make that point, being uncertainty resulting in the lack of accurate modelling, asset registers and general transparency. We get mistakes happen, we absolutely get that, but if you put yourself in our shoes where our strategies and our developments and our partners or the businesses we work with strategies and develop, they don't straddle 1 year, so we need some certainty when we're putting them together, otherwise everything falls off a cliff. So I think you get my point there, and again I recognise Amendment 2 has been taken off the table. Key Amendment 3, so this is the CBD remissions. Naturally we're supportive here. I think the bottom line is if these remissions were removed, we'd struggle to make financial sense of any new office developments in the city. You know, it should be recognised, and I'll put, you know, Amendments 1 and 2, because this is the maths I've done, you know, regardless of keeping the remissions, the changes in those DC costs were about 13%, in addition to the 36%, right? So that's got to be recognised. So that makes us revisit our feasibilities in there, and I'm not sure what the maths looks like with the assets being taken out. So essentially you're sort of giving one thing and taking something away, so I think it's important to recognise that. We recommend the remissions are left in place until at least 2025, and we'd encourage the council to contribute to certainty in business and growth by consulting its intentions on DC changes at least 24 months in advance of changing them. Again, coming back to that ability to plan. A couple of further points, stuff which is close to my heart, and I'll be quick. It's fair to say that the Hamilton CBD lacks both public and private investment. As a result, it lags most cities and of a similar size in New Zealand and Australia, and Australasia, I should say, who have thrived in the current economic cycle. We've got to encourage employers to choose Hamilton CBD, grow footfall for retailers, and provide a vibrant experiential destination for employees and staff. Amendment 4, so the cap development contributions in Rotorua, I think it's pretty simple to us there. Rotorua is out of line with the rest of Hamilton and New Zealand, in fact. The cap brings some equilibrium, but really doesn't go far enough to make it feasible. Number 5, gross floor area. The change, I know this is a small thing, I've heard talk to it, and I've got 10 seconds left. To be honest, I've had trouble understanding the rationale behind it. I think the general definition of a gross floor area or a GFA in property measurement is the total floor area contained within building measured to the external face and the external walls. As I understand it, we're looking to include other areas outside of those walls in it. So I'll paraphrase what I've put here. I think it's going to create more confusion than what you're trying to do for industry. Can I make a couple of closing comments, Mayor?
Yes, just we can wrap it up there, that'd be good.
So in summary, in relation to the CBD, I think we currently have momentum, but we're behind others and need to make it as easy as possible to differentiate the Hamilton CBD and provide growth and jobs. We can hold as many events in the city as we like, but the bottom line is we need probably another 6,000 people working in the city. Okay. We support holding those remissions. Goes any further, our rents are going to go up. We're not going to get demand and deals. Generally, our supply chain are telling us things are slowing down in the area. They're doing a lot more outside of the area, and believe that's in relation to the things I've spoken about today. So in closing, we, the Fosters Group, have stayed in the background on this policy, believing that development in the business community should pay something. Let me be clear about that. However, we felt it was time to come forward. Don't forget, we're not just developers. We provide services to many businesses and heavily support our community and over 160 jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Reece. Somebody presenting for Kiwi and Murta Properties. Is that you, Bill? Okay. So are you presenting for both together or separately?
No, it's combined.
Combined, okay. Thank you.
Your Worship, the Mayor and Councillors, my name is Bill Mitchmore and I provide development contribution support services to a number of businesses, both here in Hamilton and elsewhere. A number of my clients are here today and others have submitted directly. I find my clients, without exception, are more than happy to contribute towards the cost of network infrastructure in the form of development contributions, provided the development contributions are fair and equitable. By this I mean the development contribution charges are fair and equitable, and the demand they generate at their sites are also fairly and equitably assessed by HCC when calculating the development contributions. Unfortunately, most of my clients are very much of the view that HCC cannot be relied upon to act fairly and equitably in regard to either the setting of the charges or the assessment of the site demand. My clients are also very concerned about the massive increases in charges in recent times and the risks these higher charges present to future development in Hamilton City. I'm aware of a number who are now re-evaluating whether to proceed with projects, which is a shame. They are also very concerned about the knock-on effect of charge increases if growth doesn't proceed as Council currently assumes. In addition, they don't like the procedural barriers put in place by HCC and the associated uncertainties with, whenever they challenge development contribution assessments. The 5 HEU demand differential threshold for DC emissions, which very clearly discriminates against small to medium scale projects with demonstrably low demand profiles. They don't like the use of service connection application triggers to require the early payment of development contributions assessed under resource consents and building consent triggers. They just don't like it. They view this as a monopoly abuse. They also object to the refusal to repay development contributions where they have been over-assessed by HCC. A number of my clients have recently been exposed to a new methodology that HCC is now using to calculate DC emissions when the actual site demand is considerably lower than what HCC originally imagined. HCC now concocts site-specific emission factors that result in sites with lower demand than HCC originally imagined being levied with higher charges than scheduled in the DC policy. Porter's experience that was discussed with you a little bit earlier is not on its own. The Local Government Act prescribes a methodology for calculating development contributions, which certainly does not provide for sites in the same catchment with the same demand being levied at different rates. You will appreciate why some developers are very upset about HCC's conduct. Many of my clients are also sick to death of hearing about the growth pays for growth principle, when there is plenty of evidence in the schedule of assets and the data inputs into the DC model to indicate growth is paying for more than the cost of growth in many instances. Examples include the inclusion of capitalised operating costs, the inclusion of assets that HCC doesn't directly own. They may have paid for them, but they don't own them. The inclusion of unfunded strategic capex, historical over-allocations that are not being corrected for consistency purposes. The community benefits of growth are just not being adequately recognised. And they are concerned about direct contributions made by developers are also not being directly adequately recognised. And there appears to be overlays of upgrade costs at treatment plants over many years that are just unexplainable. Finally, I trust the responses to the key amendments set out in my written submission can be taken as read. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, for your presentation. Thomas Gibbon for the property group. Thomas, wake up, mate. Clock won't start till you're ready, Thomas.
We'll reset it.
Relax, Thomas.
It's like a bowler's run-up. Kia ora everyone. For those who don't know me, Thomas Gibbons here from Property Council New Zealand. Obviously talking to development contributions, you'll all have seen the written submission. Don't know if any of the other speakers have picked up on it. Another way of describing the term is employer contributions, because that ultimately is what it comes back to. People who are employing others having to pay a share, or sometimes perhaps more than a fair share, of what needs to be raised. Reflecting on Chris's presentation for the Chamber and what we want to see from our city, and it is things like competitiveness, innovation. We want to see the development that is needed to house growing businesses, and we want to see the housing to get built that is needed for families. And where we get to as an organisation is that this is critical infrastructure for the city, that these buildings and developments actually happen. And the issues in the policy change are really not about technicalities. They are really about big, big issues for the city. There's been some frustration expressed around this idea that growth pays for growth. Did a bit of digging. I did eventually find the phrase, which I couldn't see in the growth funding policy or in the DC's policy originally. I think it's part of the financial strategy policy. What I do encourage is for that to get revisited sooner rather than later. I don't think anyone quite knows what it means. I always imagine growth as fundamentally population growth, which means more babies in the city, which is a good thing. I think sometimes it's understood as infrastructure need. That's quite a different question. If we're talking about business and economic growth, that's something a good DC's policy should enable rather than frustrate. What we're seeing is some members coming to us and saying Hamilton's actually not the best place to do development anymore. There's some nice little towns down the road. They're better places to go. Hamilton's actually become quite an outlier around DCs, and that's a big concern, that we have some of the highest DCs in the country. So what should development contributions be? Well, they should be a contribution, just that. They shouldn't necessarily be covering everything. A number of people have touched on this idea of a fair share. But when we get projects that simply don't happen because of a DC's cost, that's an indication that something's gone quite wrong. The impact of that is not just on our members, it's a flow-on effect for the people of Hamilton. Our members have highlighted issues around project feasibility, projects that get cancelled where the DCs are too high. People look at things like putting up temporary buildings rather than fixed structures to help keep costs down. And as I said, they look elsewhere, they look down the road as a better place to do development. Touching on one specific issue, the GFA change would be a crazy way of extracting more revenue from people, because business is done a certain way, and trying to extract every extra dollar is not the best approach here. Too much DCs, too high a DC level means that Hamilton can't actually grow properly, can't house its growing population. And again, we're seeing signs of what I'd call regional sprawl. You can have the best planning framework for Hamilton you like, but if people are building businesses, building buildings, and building houses in Cambridge, Te Awamutu or other districts, then we're getting employment elsewhere, smart people going elsewhere, and we're not getting the kind of competitive, innovative city that we really want to see. So through the DC's policy, Council can either help growth happen or it can stifle it. We go through in our submission a member survey which talks about some of the member concerns that the proposed policy is not going to help growth. We've put some things in supportive aspects or conditional supportive aspects in the policy, so it is a very balanced submission. But some of the member feedback was very blunt. Comments like, you either want us in the city or you don't. And that's very concerning to hear. I want to touch on one more point, which is the growth of a DC's industry. It should be a policy that's clear, simple, easy to apply. But what we're seeing is planners, lawyers, consultants, all picking up the idea that there is a bigger issue here which needs to be addressed. And that's ultimately not a good thing for the city, that we have a policy that is of such magnitude and complexity that it's becoming something that people make money out of, rather than get on with doing the things they should do to help build a better city. That's all from me.
Thank you, Thomas. Jen. Thank you, Greg. So at this point, I just want to thank those who have come in to submit and taken the time out and the amount of work that you've put into your submissions. So thank you very much.
I'll just hand over to the team beside me.
So for members, we're on item 5.
Good afternoon, elected members. I'm just here to provide a verbal update with further information that the staff have garnered from the submissions over the past week of having a chance to digest them. As you will note in the report, there were 28 submissions on the development contributions policy. The submission themes, generally, as you've heard today, follow that the updated growth modelling environment, the submitters weren't happy that we were making changes to the growth modelling environment, and many submitters expressed concerns that there wasn't transparency with the growth model. The proposed amendment number 2, inclusion of additional assets in the schedule, which you have resolved not to follow through with today, that was heavily submitted against. Proposed amendment number 3, CBD remissions. Most submitters supported this, but there were a few submitters who raised questions around equity, like you heard from Peter today about his property being outside the boundary and that he didn't feel it was fair and an even playing field. But most submitters did see the need to help support the CBD in the interim. As far as the non-residential rota-carry caps, most submitters conditionally supported the implementation of caps in rota-carry, but the similar concerns around equity between different development areas were raised, and some submitters said that these caps don't go far enough into supporting development in the area. As far as the GFA clarification was concerned, respondents overall did not agree with the amendment, and many saw it as council trying to increase the ability to collect GFA. And the updated schedule of development contribution charges, submitters were opposed to paying higher charges in general across the board. Other matters that were raised through the submission process that weren't proposed to be changed were remissions was heavily submitted on. Generally, there was 4 key themes around remissions that submitters weren't happy with. They're not happy with the 5 Huey threshold being a barrier to start talking about actual demand with council. They were seeking some confirmation of timeframes where council would commit to getting responses back to applicants, and they sought better resources where they could estimate remission outcomes themselves before entering the process at all. There were many submitters commented on PPI, that they thought that it was more appropriate potentially to only amend the charges by PPI between LTP cycles. There were several other areas where they commented on, including seeking clarification around growth pays for growth, further changes to GFA definitions and where milestones were paid. Just the next steps, as noted in the recommendations, after you've that we're going to consider the feedback in the deliberations report on the 21st of May, and then there will be a subsequent meeting on the 20th of June scheduled for potential adoption of a policy.
Okay, so just to be clear, this is not a time for opinions. This is a time if you would like staff to research the points on page 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullet points, and if there are any questions, those are the things that we're considering. If there's anything that you're unsure about, those that you would like staff to come back and report on at the next meeting, now's the chance to bring that forward.
Just to add to that, the next report will be our summary of what we've heard and what's been submitted. If there's particular information from submitters that you want further clarification on, it's the opportunity to go talk to them and gain that information for the deliberations report as well.
Councillor Angela.
Again, CE, a question for you, and I do have some items I'd like to be brought back in the staff report. How are you going to manage the information, like the information outside of the 6 points or 5 points now that we've done this in that report around, because I have the, obviously concerns around overcharging, the site demand credits, how we give that back, not money, transparency of the policy, and the whole basket of other issues. How are you going to deal with that in the report?
So firstly, we've got to make sure that we do the job we're set to do in terms of those 5 points, so that they will be covered. I've already spoken to a couple of developers about how we can set up some a better forum, so I'm going to cover that in the report. And those broader issues regarding concerns that are outside those 5 points, I intend to respond back to those as well. It may not necessarily be the answer to those concerns, but it might just be a way forward how we're going to address them. But they'll be covered in the report also, Councillor.
Thank you. And that will form a part of your recommendation in terms of capturing whether it's a task force, a working group with the investment community, the start of a process of a complete review. You're going to actually give a little bit of that detail.
Yep, you saw me.
That'll be a recommendation.
You saw me fluttering around the room, and I was doing stuff pretty much on the fly just now, just trying to make sure while the developers are in the room, talking to a couple of them. But the goal is to bring back something a bit more concrete in terms of making this process as best as we can going forward.
So there's a way forward. Okay.
Yep.
So a couple of things raised on the 5 points then that I'd like to see some commentary in the report. I want an idea of how much revenue is likely to be sacrificed if the GFA as it is doesn't go ahead and we stick with what we've got now. I'm sure you can take a sample of a commercial area in the city somewhere. I suspect it'll be minimal. Also, as raised by some submitters not speaking today but written ones, I'd like to understand the percentage of DC assessments that we are doing where we are getting requests to reconsider and some trend data around that. I want to understand how the relationship to that is with the current policy, including the one that we adopted through the LTP. I also want to see how you're going to remedy that was brought through from the submissions about separately budgeting for the rates remission, so directly to the CBD remission. That was raised in a lot of the written submissions, not just from speakers today. I need to understand why we issue a credit note and don't give people their money back. Raised by Chedworth, I'd like to also understand exactly how we treat and provide information for developers on what third-party contributions are, because we have to be transparent with that stuff under the Act. So I'd like to understand what's going on there. I think hopefully I'm sticking, these are all within the 5 points. I'd like to understand in the report what was raised, I think, was it Peacocks and Aotearoa around the infrastructure that's being provided by developers that hasn't yet been accounted for in our policy. I think that's sticking within that 5 points. If not, I'm sure you'll tell me with the report. And I'd like to understand the rationale and case again for the 5 HUE threshold. So hopefully all of that stuff is within those 5 points.
Yep, so just to go back to your question, now I've heard your 5 points, your points regarding the 5 points. What we're going to do is we're going to separate out the closing out the consultation decision around the DC policy in one report, and then which can get out of the way, and then we'll have a separate report which will discuss the other stuff that's outside the 5 points to keep it very clear, so we get one process finished to put a bow on it, and then we can progress with the other stuff. So you get all the information, but it'll be separated into 2 different reports.
But the second report won't be in detail, is it? Because I've got several pages of things that I would want to information back on and challenge. That's going to be in the second report or the second whatever motion. How we're going to fix all of this other stuff? Well, we've got to also or how we're going to address it.
Yeah, address it is better comment because it's actually
not for me, but
it's a matter of electoral will, whether or not some of it is actually it's not broken, but it's an interpretation of policy. So it's not about fixing; it's about addressing.
Thank you.
There may well be some timing differences between the second report as well. Yeah, so it won't be lost. We've just got to make sure we focus on the reason we're here is to close out the consultation, and we'll make note in the area of the date that will bring the other report back, so it's locked and loaded.
Okay, so just to reiterate, we're here to consider on page 6, point 4, bullet points 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, with bullet point 5 being removed by the earlier resolution. So that's what we're asking for feedback on. If anything you're not clear on out of those 5 bullet points, for staff to come back so that we've got a full report when we come to deliberations. So that's what I want to hear from you on. This is not a forum to bring in other things outside of that process in this deliberations report. I want to focus on this deliberations report. There's been all sorts of other things through the submissions that members will be keen to address. This is not the opportunity for that. The opportunity today is to look at these 5 bullet points. Okay, so I just want your any clarification from what you've heard or from the submissions relating to these points, these 5 points, please. Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Councillor O'Leary did address a couple of things that I'm also interested in, picking up on some that I'm not sure were mentioned. There might have been. I'd like some understanding of the merits or otherwise of PPI as a tool. A need to understand some of the macroeconomics around the city, because it has been raised and it is pertinent to these 6 things, which is what some of the economic trends are in terms of slowdown on any economic development or investment in the city as a consequence of any of those mechanisms. So if we are seeing a slowdown...
So just to be clear, we're not here to consider where the economy is going. We're here...
I said in respect to those things. So if, for example, just to be refreshed, what's happening in the CBD as a result of any changes that we have proposed to make, for example?
We will consider it to the extent it does impact on the submissions, but there's very little that actually here would be able to be proven from an economic perspective that would make a significant difference in those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess we'll have that conversation. Rotokauri cap has been mentioned that it is insufficient to make it feasible to even do the first stage of Rotokauri that is possible before the swale. So I'd like to have some deeper look at that and understand where that's going, because the cap was supposed to be a useful mechanism, and that was raised by one of the submitters here today. And another thing that was raised that is the actual demand versus forecast demand, and I understood what the point that was being made, but what I don't understand is how it's differently applied. I mean, how do you forecast, and what is meant by actual when a development may not actually be in place? It may be that kind of thing. So just how we do, why there is a point of difference or a perceived point of difference, that would be useful. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, don't want to limit any of the information. I should say that the deliberations report's due Monday morning. So I have to, I think Stafford's already in the weekend. I'm overseas over the weekend. So I don't want to limit anything, but, you know, we're obviously at the very back end of this process. So we will answer everything we can, but just want to caution against just expectations, managing expectations, says Richard.
And just to help you, I mean, there have clearly been questions asked that are outside of the parameters, like non-residential. It clearly says non-residential, not residential. You don't have to write a report on what's happening with the residential sections there. There does need to be another forum where we bring that back and address these other things, but they're not a part of your report. Your report is to cover the points, the 5 bullet points here that I keep going back to.
Yeah, thanks.
It's not to be broadened out to everything that's been said that's outside of these 5 points. I do agree there needs to be a forum to bring those back, but that's not a part of what you're bringing back over the weekend.
Yeah, so Richard's to separate those reports, and that's fine. I do want to make sure that we meet all our obligations in terms of the consultation and the proper responses to those. And yes, I don't want to. I just want to make sure that the other work doesn't, you know, compromise that. And look, we're happy to do all the work required to address those other things, you know. But I think, yeah, the priority is to do what we need to do as far as this consultation and its questions.
And a number of these questions have been raised when we actually had the initial discussion regarding, for example, the CBD remission, and it was made clear at that stage we didn't have the opportunity to actually go off to a full economic assessment on the CBD and the impact of remissions. So we only have what the information we provided previously and the feedback we received from presentations made by Mr Neild and so forth in previous meetings. So there's probably not much more we can provide on that front.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Tell me if I'm wandering off the plantation. Okay, just picking up on Paula's and just being a bit more specific than what Paula was, the assessed cost stroke demand versus actual cost stroke demand. I always thought that was an opportunity to bring in a private development agreement. I thought that was how you, private developer agreements are an ability for the developer to challenge our assessment. Is that right?
So private developer agreements are an option to you know, reach an agreement, particularly around developments that are not typical. Sorry.
And so we've had a lot of people here, particularly one chap, I can't, that, you know, that the assessment was massively greater than the actual. Now, that seems to me to be a totally...
Gary, I don't want to hear what you seem...
Okay, can that be addressed?
You're asking...
Yes,
yeah, right. Can that be addressed?
That's already captured.
But I don't know that that's part of one of these four things.
It is part of that. It does reflect part of that aspect.
Yeah, and I understand what Mr DeLuca is saying, and it is a broader issue that, yes, we'll address, but doesn't necessarily fall directly into the 5 questions.
Okay, and this one is relating Rota Turner, which is one of the Rota Carey, beg your pardon, which is one of the things. The other, one of that might have been Hounsel, I think. One of the chaps came out here and said that they could build. They're doing mitigating the stormwater thing way cheaper than we are suggesting, which may again be that RDA, a PDA, beg your pardon, situation. But he's the guy I'm going to.
Yep. So there's again that's outside the 5 points, but we will address that in this secondary report.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Andrew. Yeah, look, I've got one which does fall amongst those 5 bullet points, which I just want to but I also just want to support Councillor O'Leary and other speakers in that there are a number of ones which will fall outside that 5 that I want to hear more about, such as the repayment of DCs when they've been over-assessed. and I'm keen to hear what some of those discrepancies explained as well, so I won't go on much more about that, but I think we definitely need to hear more about those. In terms of the bullet points, the gross floor area, which has been mentioned, I'm keen to hear a bit more about the rationale behind that change, what the actual impact is worth to us, what sort of precedent there is for that outside in other authorities around the country, yeah, you know, that's an important one, just to hear a bit more about that. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Thank you, Chair. Look, my question is around perhaps the implementation of all 5, and that is, I think I'd like to see some clarity around what growth pays for growth really means, because having removed 1 today is, in terms of my understanding of what growth means, growth pays for growth means, is that we're not applying that policy. So I'd like to see some, and it may be that it comes from David Bryant rather than from you, but I'd like to see what we understand growth pays for growth mean, so that we can at least get that information out to the developers so that they understand it. And it may be something that becomes an area for debate or discussion later on.
Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just again reiterating Councillor Taylor there in regards to the gross floor area, and hearing from Council's view and the other view, and whether there's some sort of middle ground there, and also those examples given to us from Mr. De Luca regarding actual remission assessed and actuals, and how we're getting such variations. And also whether our policy is a bit of a cookie cutter and doesn't fit some of the larger warehousing, and just how that plays out a little bit more in terms of, obviously we've just done this big policy and now we're rolling it out, and maybe we've just got to make some adjustments here. So I'd just be interested in some detail around that, Greg.
Okay, and just from me, we've got the verandas and the roof areas which aren't closed in, which came up, which is directly related to one of these. There was an implication that we were outside of what the industry standards were. So if you can just address that, there's an implication that we're the only ones doing this and everyone else measures wall to wall and doesn't cover for verandas, and where's it all going to lead if you have a little cover in your supermarket over your trolleys or something? Is that roof area if we start moving into this veranda space? So just a clarification around that and what other councils are doing. And then outside of the direct report, but for your other report that you're doing, I just wonder if there's merit in us looking at equity across the city. So putting the whole lot in one basket and then just setting it, so taking our zones out, and whether that's even legal, to come back as your secondary report separate to this. There was the question about the stormwater plan for that whole Gallagher area out the back and things, that water planning, there's a special word for it, but yep, for that whole growth area there, and we know it's very low, and we've had talk last week from another developer on that. And just the fairness and equity concerns that are coming through, and the implication of a lack of trust in council on this, and again outside of this report, but in your other area of where we go from here to work this through with the developers.
You said you wanted them to do some work on zones. Zones, I think, is that what we call catchments? Are you talking about catchments?
No, it's outside of the water area. There was somebody referred to. At the moment, we have different areas where we have different DC rates depending on what the costs are.
Yes, yes,
well,
I think you guys call them catchments, don't you?
Yeah, catchments.
Catchments. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Can we ring fence?
But I just want to make sure that's what you mean.
One basket and say. So some areas are effectively subsidising others, and just not for now, but and not for this report, but for your other.
So what parts of the city benefit from that particular road and things like that, eh? That's what you talk about within catchments, is that right?
Yeah, they'll get it. Yeah. All right, so moved by myself, sorry, we have more. Councillor Ryan. Councillor Siggy.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
Thank you. No problem. I just thought about that because I'm not sure whether that was covered. One of the things I heard, and I think it was from the Porters group, that the warehouse versus heavy industry in a similar building size, you know, why paying the same DCs? So can I have some clarifications on that, please? Thank you.
Councillor Ryan.
Lucy from, I think it was Adair, mentioned about the Peacock Sports Park 1 and 2 and the $2,000 variation between DCs there. Just some clarity around that. Thank you.
Okay, so moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Ryan. All those, any debate? Okay, all those for? Any against? Carried unanimously. I thank you very much. That's the end of the meeting. So. Well done, Becky.